Welcome to part two, exploring around Woodson County, Kansas. In the first part, we went around the eastern part of the county, and we're basically starting in the middle of the county now, and working our way northwest and west and southwest, kind of the western half. So it's very, very windy today here in Kansas, and not atypical for a spring day. We're starting in Kalida, Kansas, or Kalida, tomato. This was interesting. This is a very interesting place to get started. And I'm sitting here next to the Kalida Castle Cave, which is pretty much the only remnant left of the town. And I mentioned in the first video, there were 4 county seats of Woodson County. And this was the one that I didn't show in the first episode here. Only about 3 months long was this place the county seat. And what happened was Neosho Falls was the county seat. And so as I'm talking, I'm going to show you what's here. There's an old house. There's the castle. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But I'll show you some of that while I'm talking. But Neosho Falls was the county seat. And then it was way up in the northeast corner of the county. And so they wanted to have it more centralized, and this is centralized. And so this town got built up, and there were like 500 people living here in the 1870s, and they won an election to bring the county seat here. But what people didn't realize when they voted for it is there really was not water available here. And they figured that out pretty quickly, and not having water in the 1870s was very, detrimental to your town. And so real quickly, the county, organizers was like, we need to have another county seat, or we need to have another vote. And so Defiance, which was the one we visited in the first episode, won the county seat, and it was moved, pretty quickly. So this was a very short-lived time here. And then people either moved to Defiance, a couple years after that, Yates Center was created, and there was way better water there than even in Defiance. And so everything kind of moved to Yates Center, including people who lived here, buildings that were here. I think that a hotel, they said, moved by Ox, had moved the hotel. And so the post office here was here for only a few years, but it was kind of a boom and bust situation. You usually hear about that with like oil towns, but this was because of a county seat that went away. And this castle is interesting because somebody who lived here had been to a World's Fair and saw some designs or saw something like that and decided to come back here and build one in Kalida, Kansas. And it was a farmer's utility cave. So it wasn't like a cave that went somewhere secret. It was used to store milk in the summer, which was, difficult to keep cool. And then it was used to store vegetables and fruits, things like that in the winter. And so it's pretty interesting little roadside attraction. It's all kinds of private property and no trespassing signs. I'm sure they've had issues with people, coming in and hopping the fence and things like that. I'll try to find a picture of what it looks like from the side, because it's like, natural turf kind of over top of it and cave on each side. So I've not seen anything from inside the cave. It would be interesting to see something from inside the cave. If there's anybody out there that has any information like that, would be cool. But yeah, so this is where we're getting our day started, and so let's explore around the rest of the west of Woodson County. As we pull up to the Belmont Cemetery, it looks innocent enough sitting here in the corner, but this area is very historical, even though there's not much left except for the cemetery. Belmont history lasts about 20 years and was started in 1857, and a fort known as Fort Belmont was started in the same area. And the fort was built to protect the settlers from Indians, and the Missouri Border Ruffians, as they were called. There was a military road from Fort Leavenworth that came through Belmont, and they brought supplies to the Native Americans who were camped along the nearby Big Sandy Creek. It was a pretty significant town from 1857 until 1865 when the war ended. There were, there was a stagecoach station. There was everything that towns, at that time would have. Grocery stores, post office, hotels, and there was an Indian agency here, federal Indian agency. There were a lot of forts that were created during the Civil War. This one didn't see any action. It wasn't real big, but there were a lot of Native Americans that came here to escape the Confederate advances in Oklahoma. And one time there were like 10,000 Native Americans that came up towards this area, and over 200 of them died here because there wasn't enough, food, water, shelter for them. And apparently there's unmarked graves all around here in this area where they were buried. The fort was basically closed in 1864. There was a big smallpox epidemic in the area, so a lot of the people ended up deserting Belmont. And then the post office stayed open for a little while longer and closed in 1877. So not much to see anymore today, but definitely a historic area of Woodson County. At this portion of the trip, we're gonna go back through Yates Center again. We did that in part one of the video, and like I mentioned in that, I did a Small Town USA video exploring and talking about the history of Yates Center. So if you didn't watch that then and you're wanting to take the tour this time, that would be the time chronologically as we go around Woodson County to learn more about Yates Center. So we're gonna pass through Yates Center and then continue more towards the north central part of the county. As I was driving to my next destination, little dot on the map, I came across what looks like an old school. It's at the intersection of 75 and 160th, and it certainly looks newer. It doesn't, like from the first episode, there was the Pleasant Valley School, the old stone building. And this is certainly newer, but I wonder if this was maybe the foundations were of a original school. When you look inside, it looks like it could have been a old school or some sort of community center. Our next dot on the map is Coloma. And not much information except there was a post office from 1865 to 1902, which is a pretty long time. And apparently before that in this area, there was a post office in a place called Mount Airy from 1860 to about 1864. Obviously right around that end of that is the Civil War end. So I don't know if it had anything to do with that. I did find an old creepy house kind of in the trees next to the road, abandoned house, but that was certainly not from those times. Sometimes these dots on the map, or when it says a post office, it was a rural area and it really wasn't a town, and it was just a place to gather, the mail and then it get distributed out here because there were farmers and people all scattered across here. So may have been a town, might have just been a rural post office. We're not finding a lot of evidence of towns, but we're finding some cemeteries. And if you're into, old kind of country, rural, even pioneer cemeteries, Woodson County's got a lot of them. I'm increasingly becoming more interested in that as I have explored through the years. So Definitely a lot of cemeteries. We may find a few more. Hopefully we can find some evidence of some towns. I know at the end of the video, we will definitely find a town. Burke is around here, or Bert or Burke. Found a place called Nickeltown Cemetery on Google Maps, and was assuming it'd be like these other places where it's just a little kind of rural cemetery. And I pull up, and wouldn't you know it, there's an old schoolhouse here. And it's pretty remarkable because it's all boarded up. You know, you can tell that it's certainly older and hasn't been kind of refurbished or anything like that. But so it's right here next to the cemetery. So I don't know much about the history at all of this, except for a little bit of searching online. I found that this was a Mennonite community, and there was a small group of people who had migrated here and I guess started the community, maybe the school, but it was called School District 43, and just goes to show how many schools there were if this was number 43. And it's all boarded up. Obviously, you get real curious, wondering what's inside. So I do have a really terrific selfie stick that extends far, and I was able to give a little peek into the inside of the Nickeltown School. So very cool, as we're not finding too much today except for cemeteries, which the cemetery was cool too, of just a few headstones there, and all of them pretty much from the 1800s. But it was cool to find this way out here. There's nothing but a little bit of oil fields and cattle surrounding Nickeltown. This is a really desolate part of Woodson County. You can tell people don't go down these roads very often, and but it's also, I think it's kind of pretty out here. You know, it's hillier over here on this side compared to the last part of the video where we were in the eastern half. But yeah, it's a lot of cattle and a lot of wide open dirt roads, and pretty awesome. Another lonely road and another old schoolhouse that's been updated, it appears, but in the same style as the other ones we're seeing. They were probably built all around the same time. They all have very similar sizes, and probably this one's still being used at some level for meetings of some kind. As we make it back down to Highway 54, there's a place called Batesville, which, if you remember the first part of this video series, these two-part video series of Woodson County, I went to Durand and Athens, who didn't have post offices, but they were stops along the railroad, and the railroad went right along 54 here. And that's what this was too. There was no post office to speak of, or who knows if there was any, much of a community, but it was a stop along the railroad back in the day. And the wind is certainly wreaking havoc today, and it feels like it's going to blow over what is left over here of Batesville. A couple old buildings that were probably right along the railroad line. This is the calmest the wind's been all day. Down a dead-end road, we find the big sandy cemetery, and kind of interesting, back in the trees with some, you know, fairly older burials, and then some newer ones closer to the front when you pull in. We haven't had a lot of towns today that we've gone through, but we're going to actually finish the video at a town, the town of Toronto, Kansas, which was named after Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and obviously much smaller version of Toronto. So let's go check that out and we'll wrap up the video. Unfortunately, it started to rain, and so as I make my way over to the only town of the day, I'm not going to be able to fly my drone because rain and drones don't mix. But I'll definitely show you around Toronto. It's interesting. They've got a nice little downtown. You can see some historic buildings here. You know, it started in the 1860s, and they built it along the river over here. But it didn't have a railroad, you know, in the early days, so it was kind of slow to grow. And then in 1882, the railroad finally came through, and that helped a lot, and it grew something like 500, 600 people. And then in the early, you know, in the 19-teens, I think, they discovered oil, so it grew even more, and the population went up over 800. And then, common story, the oil depletes, the railroad pulls out, and then the population starts to decline. But there is something else here. It's not just a town, and it's just kind of slowly getting smaller, although it is getting smaller, down to 206 people. But in the 1950s, the Army Corps of Engineers dammed the river and started creating Toronto Lake. And then there is the Cross Timbers State Park that is right there by the lake. So that gives, you know, recreational things to do here. So that's nice that has potential maybe for this community to survive for hopefully many years to come. It's kind of only sprinkling, so I thought I'd hop outside and try to give one part of today's video while standing outside. It's been so windy. This is some of the calmest wind. It's probably blowing about 20 miles an hour. But yeah, what'd you think of Woodson County? It has been very interesting the past couple days of exploring. The first part, seeing a lot of small towns, or not a lot, but a few small towns, and seeing lots of cemeteries the last couple days, and then ending up here at this really beautiful lake and state park. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned quite a bit, and even though population has shrunk by 70% in the county since its peak, there's still a lot to see here, and obviously a lot of people that care about Woodson County. There are more places that I did not find that were post office locations, so I'll put them on the screen, and if anybody wants to continue that discussion, maybe they know about some of them, feel free to put it in the comments, and we'd really appreciate it. So once again, hope you enjoyed Woodson County. I know I did, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching this video series on Woodson County, Kansas. If you like this video, there are several ways to support the channel. You can donate by hitting the thanks button under the video or purchase Travel with a Wise Guy merchandise. In the description of this video is a link to my website where you can learn more about the channel and sign up for my newsletter. And if you aren't interested in any of that, I'm just happy you took a few minutes out of your day to watch this video and learn more about Woodson County, Kansas. Thank you very much, and now on to the outtakes. At least the rain will wash the car off. It heated it pretty bad. That makes me curious. Let's go check it out. Yeah, I would say that bridge is out. I guess it went right over there. It's Toronto, Kansas, named after Toronto,